Hello again, Chris Lee and Stuart Lackey through the magic of the internet, or not, talking Kentucky football tonight. It has been a day behind the scenes here as we try to get this to work. Stuart, much like Kentucky's football team, sometimes this works and sometimes it doesn't. But, it has been a crazy last 8 quarters for the Cats. 2 pretty good ones and 6 that were something else. But guess what? Coming to Lexington are the Tennessee Vols, who had a glorious first 30 minutes of football in Tuscaloosa and then a disaster the last 30. So in the misery loves company category, we got a matchup here. But look, all kidding aside, when these two teams have been good, they've been pretty good. And I think both are certainly better football teams than we saw last. And for that reason, I can't wait to see this one in Lexington Saturday.
Yeah, no question, Chris. Both teams coming in at 5-2. A lot on the line. I think many people looking at this as a pivotal matchup for both seasons, right? The winner of this game, there's arguably an inside track to a 9-3 season, maybe even better. And to the loser, we can kind of, see historically what can happen after, Kentucky. This would be 3 losses in a row. And certainly Stoops, Coach Stoops and his staff don't want Kentucky to get in that scenario. But you mentioned it, coming out of the Mizzou game. I think if I'd told you before that game, if Kentucky started 14-0, held Brady Cook to 175 yards passing and Luther Burden to 2 catches and 15 yards, I think you would have said that's probably a recipe for a Kentucky win.
Yeah.
But I may have left out a more important stat. That would be 122 yards and penalties, which the Cats committed, and certainly was a big part of the defeat there. So, 2 weeks off for the Cats. The coaching staff perhaps looking at retooling the scheme a little bit on offense. We can get into that and talk a little bit more about all of it as we break this one down.
Well, before we get into that, look, there's just a ton of parity in college football. I mean, there's not a lot of teams that just raise their hand and say, hey, look, guys, every week we've clicked on all cylinders. I mean, you saw that in the Big 12 this weekend, where Texas and Houston both struggled with teams that they should have beaten 3 or 4 touchdowns. I mean, you saw Georgia has struggled at times against some teams. I mean, that is just life in college football. And I'm very interested to see how Kentucky reboots from this with a couple weeks off. I'm just curious what you think that's gone wrong that is fixable. And look, when you've got Ray Davis and you've got the defense they've got, you've still got a lot to build on.
Sure. Yeah, I think, there were a couple of key people. What went wrong against Missouri? To your point, listen, Missouri's a good team, right? I mean, let's just say they found a way to win. They've got an explosive offense. We know what they can do on that side of the football. Kentucky went into that game without a couple of key defensive players, Trevon Wallace and the Keyshawn Silver up front for the Cats. And I think that really kind of took its toll. Kentucky's looking for leadership. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing. It's like, who's going to step up on both sides of the football to say, hey, this isn't good enough. We've got to be better. We've got the talent, to consistently compete at a high level. And I think, if that didn't get the players' attention, watching that debacle in the second half, against a good Missouri team, but a game that Kentucky, could and should have probably won had they just, kept the penalties at a respectable level. No reason why Kentucky shouldn't have come out with a win there, but it is the SEC. There's parity everywhere, like you mentioned, and that is college football. So none of this should surprise us, I guess, at this point.
All right, health is a big concern across a lot of teams. It's the point in the season where you're either banged up and out or probably playing beat up at some point. What's the health report for the Cats now that they've had a couple weeks to rest?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, the 2 key defensive players are back. I think they may have lost Jalen Geiger, one of their safeties. Kentucky may have lost Geiger for a good portion of the remainder of the season. Good news, Kenneth Horsey did play quite a bit against Missouri.
Oh.
And so I think that offensive line is probably going to be at full strength going into the game against Tennessee. They're definitely going to need it. So all in all, I think, again, Kentucky's in a pretty good shape, now 7 games into the season as they entered this game against Tennessee.
The passing game is due to get on track, right? I just keep looking and saying there's too much talent there for this not to click at some point. But here we are almost to Halloween, and the
Yeah.
narrative is kind of remain unmoved for the most part.
Yeah. I mean, Kentucky, let's be honest, Kentucky doesn't pass the ball, they throw the ball at this point, and there's a difference, right? I mean, Leary is just, again, continued as the competition has improved, and maybe that's a big part of it. He's got a very dismal 47% completion percentage in SEC play, and that's just awful. I mean, there's no way around it. And so will Liam Cohen dial up some scenarios on the offensive side to put him in better situation for success? I think, the receivers have to catch the ball. Think about this, Chris. 1 out of every 7 passes that Devin Leary throws that are catchable, considered catchable, Kentucky drops. It's one of the worst in not just in the league, but in the country. And again, we've talked about this. It's a repeating conversation. If they can just, control the drops, minimize that. If Leary can be a little more effective, on his side as well, the Cats can actually have a serviceable passing game. It doesn't have to be elite, just needs to be serviceable. And he needs some help from the guys catching the football.
All right. Ray Davis has been just a monster all year. I think Jace McClellan had over 100 yards against Tennessee. I mean, that is the formula. Control clock, have Ray Davis doing Ray Davis things, and that at least sets you up with one half of the equation, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, that's what Kentucky's going to try to do. I think, again, there were some times I think it was the third offensive series that, Kentucky went away from Ray Davis, and you wonder, hey, keep that gravy train rolling. And again, I think good things happen when he's got the football in his hands. And so, how do you get though in a situation where you're not just Ray Davis, right? I mean, you've got to get more creative. Certainly, they've used him out of the backfield. He is a superstar, and there's no doubt. But you've got to be able to do something else. Get the tight ends involved. But yeah, Kentucky has a great chance if they can manage that front line of Tennessee. I think, get him in situations where he can make plays. I think he'll be effective. And again, Lee and Cohen is a great signal caller. The scripting is not the problem for Kentucky. So again, they're going to need some help on the outside, and Leary's going to have to be successful. He's going to have to play probably the best game of his Kentucky career for the Cats to have a chance to win on Saturday. But certainly Ray Davis is a big part of that too.
Here's what I'm really interested to see. The Kentucky offense has done a decent job of not giving up sacks. It's given up 11. I think that's one of the lower numbers in the league. Yep. Tennessee has made, I think, 28, making it one of the better sack attacks in not just the SEC, but college football. If Kentucky can block guys, again, I keep coming. Leary just feels like he's due to play better. We haven't seen it yet, but that's one thing to watch is if they protect him. But that's been an issue because Tennessee's gotten to most everybody.
Well, I mean, James Pierce, let's start with him up front for Tennessee. I mean, he's not only one of the best rushers in the SEC, maybe one of the best in the country, a sophomore, but he's supported by, a few other guys, Barron, Beasley, Thomas, and then they've got a lot of depth. And Kentucky, again, is after last year's, fall of the Big Blue Wall, so to speak, they've begun to rebuild it and certainly have played well, protected Leary. Again, they've got the players, I think, to be competitive. The question is can they protect him, for an entire game against that Tennessee front line? And that'll be part of the keys to the game for sure.
All right. Other side where Kentucky has been really good most of the season. One thing that I like for Kentucky's chances is that Kentucky's forcing turnovers on almost 2.5% of the snaps. Tennessee will give it up a little bit. Joe Milton will put it out there, not on a receiver. They fumbled a few times recently. They're not really a prolific passing attack. They're getting 6.1 yards per pass attempt. They did hit a big one against Alabama early in that game. So, I mean, there's potential there. It's a lot like Kentucky. It's just so hit and miss. But on the other hand, I think Kentucky's defensive line has done a pretty good job of stopping the run. Tennessee's one of the best rushing teams in the country. What you need to do if you're Kentucky, you need to get Tennessee behind the chains, force them to 3rd and 6 and 7, force them to throw. And if Kentucky can do that, Um, I like it shot there.
Well, they're going to have to. The Cats rank, I think, 107th in third down efficiency on defense. So as great as the defense has played on third down, not so great. And of course, those last two games have had a lot to do with that average. But yeah, I think it's forcing Milton, to throw the football to try to get those run fits really compressed. And again, that's Stoops talked about plastering, and certainly in coverage situations, the Tennessee receivers out of the backfield. I mean, there's going to be a lot of one-on-one matchups. Kentucky's going to have to, keep that, the middle half of the field and those run fits really, well fitted or well protected rather. And we'll see. I mean, Joe Milton has proven that he can beat you with his legs too. So, we'll have to see how it unfolds. But again, this is, Georgia obviously was a big test. Passing game of Missouri was a big test. This is going to be probably the most balanced team that Kentucky has faced. I think if you look at the stats, Tennessee is running and passing the ball, very equally, right, in most of their ball games, even though they're a great run team. So this is going to put a lot of individual pressure on Kentucky as it has. Heupel's going to try to, obviously go up tempo. And so Kentucky, can they respond? Can the communication be good on the field? It's going to be a rowdy crowd, a 7 p.m. kickoff at Kroger Field on Saturday night. And so all those things are going to have an impact on the game. And, Kentucky's, again, it's going to have to play its best game of the season on both sides of the football to have a chance to win.
Yeah, Tennessee does run it 52% of the time, a little bit more than it throws it. Kentucky actually is reversed. Kentucky runs it 48% of the time, if anybody was wondering. But
Let me say this too. I mean, Tennessee is in terms of explosives, it's kind of surprising in terms of not a lot of explosives, especially in the pass game, right? And so that kind of goes back to our earlier comment. If Kentucky do a good job on first and second down, getting third and long, they've got a really good shot being successful in those scenarios.
One thing Tennessee does that's a little problematic for pretty much anybody. First of all, Milton's a runner and he's a big guy, so he's tough to bring down. He will put his head down and try to get some tough yards. Which, if you're the head coach and the OC, you might not want that all the time, but hey, it works for you in the moment. That's number one. Number two, they'll run some option. I think I've seen a lot of Kentucky. I don't remember, have they run up against anybody that has the option in the playbook much?
Haven't faced it yet. But yeah. So again, Brad White's one of the best in the league in terms of game prep. It's just, it's going to, so there's not going to be a surprise there. I think they've got the talent, to be able to defend that. That's assignment football, right? When it gets like that on the edges, and so can Kentucky just have the discipline rather, to play assignment football in those scenarios?
Yeah. To me, the keys are establish Ray Davis, control the clock, don't turn it over, and keep Tennessee in third and long. Am I missing anything here?
They're going to have to pass the ball, Chris. I mean, Kentucky Devin Leary doesn't have to win the game, but he has to make an impact on this game with his arm. And so Ray Davis, I agree, chew up the clock. But I mean, if you can't, let's just say you can't run the football, right? They stuff the run. Got to be successful running the ball, then get Leary maybe in play action. And that doesn't work if you don't establish the run. But he has got to be able to complete some balls, and his receivers are going to have to grow up. And hopefully they've had a chance to figure out some of those things in the last 2 weeks during the bye. And again, if you listen to Coach Stoops this week, he's like, hey, they had a great week of practice last week, that he thinks Leary is really close. But we've all been saying that for, 6-7 weeks now. So this is the time. If he can't get this done, let's just be honest. After this game, it doesn't get any easier, right? You got to break it in Starkville, perhaps on the road at Mississippi State, and then you're back at home against Alabama the following week. So, this is a big game for the program. If they can win this game 6-2, I think if you ask most Kentucky fans prior to the season, hey, after Tennessee, would you take a 6-2 record? I think most Kentucky fans would have said absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, here's another thing. The over under 50.5, Tennessee by 3.5 is the line. That makes for a predicted final of 27-24. It's a field goal game.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if field goals literally might decide this game. And I feel like Kentucky's been pretty solid there this year. I'm going to look up the numbers, but that's something to consider in this kind of game.
Rayner hit from 50. I think he might be perfect, or if not, he's missed just one field goal attempt.
Yeah.
Great kicker. Could come down to that. Listen, Kentucky's going to have to win this football game. There's no gimmicks here, right? If they're going to have to go out and assert themselves to win this football game, Chris. And, it may be that close. I think, that 3 points, 3.5 points, I think there's a scenario where Kentucky, if they don't come out and just, they're not ready to fight, they will absolutely get steamrolled in this game. And I hate to say that, but that is very much a possibility. They're going to come. They have to be the aggressor in this and come out and absolutely go take this game and win it. And if it comes down to a field goal, I do like Kentucky's kicker in that scenario.
Yeah, Alex
maybe
Rayner,
maybe more this year than in many years past.
Well, for sure about that. Rayner's 6 of 6 on field goals, 27 on point after touchdowns. I thought he was close to perfect, and sure enough, he nearly was. Now, here's the weird thing. All those field goals, 3 of them came against Ball State, 2 against Florida, and then 1 in the other 5 games combined. That was a 27-yarder against Vanderbilt. So it's been really interesting. And I guess like Eastern Kentucky, Akron, those were games where they could get touchdowns. Georgia, Missouri were games where the offense just sputtered, period. And I guess they weren't close enough for chances and far behind to where they had to look elsewhere for points.
Yeah. I think that's right. And so again, we're talking about keys. I want to go back to one point in terms of, I think Kentucky, if you can get Milton in a frustrated, and maybe there's a chance where, the Kentucky defense with Wallace back, Wallace perhaps is the best rusher at the linebacker position on Kentucky's defense. Hairston, I think he's leading the SEC or tied the SEC. He's got 5 picks. I mean, we know there's some playmakers on that side of the ball. If Milton gets to a point in the game where they're throwing the football, maybe there's a chance to, put pressure on him, force some errors and maybe get a turnover too. But again, this is a big game for Mark Stoops and the Cats. If they can find a way to win this game and then use that momentum to maybe grab a win in Starkville, coming back home against Alabama, suddenly that seems like a more intriguing matchup. So, we'll see what happens this Saturday night on ESPN. I'll be there, by the way, planning on heading up to the game. So
good.
Yeah.
Well, I'll be watching from TV. But here's an interesting, and we, of course, we're an SEC channel, so we talk about everybody, and we do picks every week. And one thing I look at not just what Vegas thinks, but also computers. It is very rare that you did see the discrepancy in lines and outcomes. At this point, we're almost to November for Power 5 teams.
Yeah.
But let me give you Exhibit A: Tennessee visiting Kentucky. The odds makers have Tennessee minus 3.5. ESPN's FBI has Tennessee minus 8. SP Plus Tennessee minus 1. Team rankings Tennessee minus 10. Jeff Sagarin Tennessee minus 11. So depending on who you listen to, Tennessee is anywhere from a 1 to 11 point favorite. That is crazy.
Well, I think that, again, I didn't know that, but it goes back to it could get away from Kentucky. And again, we'll see who shows up and how the Cats respond. But that I have never heard that kind of disparity in any college football season. That's remarkable.
Yeah, and they're models that are built on different things. I mean, most of the computers are pretty close to each other this time of the year. I think SP Plus looks a lot at yards per play and yards per play given up, and adjusts for some, maybe minimizes the impact of turnovers. I don't know. I feel like that's the one I respect it. It's a little bit of an outlier compared to others, but just when I was doing my research for this game, that popped because I'm looking at the other SEC games. I don't think you've got more than a 3 to 4 point disparity in any other games. And just for example, I'm looking at Georgia, Florida. FPI, SP Plus, team rankings all have Georgia a 15-point favorite. Sagarin's got it at 11. So that's like one of the bigger disparities with A&M and South Carolina. Everybody's got it a 14 to 15-point game. So depending on your algorithm and how you calculate what makes football teams good and what makes football teams bad, your opinions of Kentucky through the eyes of a machine very, very greatly.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. But again, people could argue, this is where college football is headed. We've talked about NIL, we've talked about these rosters turning over, and it's just in a lot of ways it's exciting, but yeah, it's certainly different than what we've seen, in the past. So
yeah.
But,
Well, I'm excited to see it. It will be in Lexington. That'll be 7 Eastern on Saturday night, Kroger Field in Lexington. Have a safe trip up there. Look forward to talking about this one next week, looking ahead to Mississippi State and just seeing all the wonderful college football across the country this weekend.
Absolutely. Chris, thanks so much. Always good to be with you.
Likewise. We apologize for our internet, and maybe I should say my internet. I don't know what was going on when we recorded this, but it wasn't good. So hopefully it wasn't too bad on your end. Anyway, for Stuart Lackey, I'm Chris Lee. We're Southeastern 14. Thanks for watching. We'll see you more again soon with more Kentucky and SEC football talk.